Wow. This is probably going to be one of the last videos I ever make in this garden. I'm really going to miss it. But cheers, it's served me very well and I've watched it grow for 12 years. Cheers everybody, and cheers to the young climate activists all over the world that are striking today, going out, doing their work, trying to get governments to listen. It's amazing watching what they're doing. I'm going to carry on doing this today because I think this is probably the most valuable thing I can do to try and contribute to improving our environment. This is part 3 of Should We Fly Anymore? It's an unfolding video series that's killing my YouTube channel, frankly, but I'm loving it. So I hope those of you that are watching will also find it interesting, informative. Basically, I started asking the question, I've been going down the rabbit hole, asking the question about should we fly anymore, led me to thinking and understanding more about carbon. When you start thinking about carbon, you start thinking what are the ways that you can reduce carbon or increase our budget for carbon. That led me on to a bunch of different routes, including planting trees. So now I've locked onto that idea, and it's combining with some previous work I did in the past, thinking could we actually make people care about trees by turning them into green gold, by making them our currency. So that when Bolsonaro is allowing burning of trees in the Amazon, it's not the Brazilians' problem, it's my bloody problem, because they're my currency, my value, my economic value that is being disrupted. Our current economic paradigm of more growth, GDP, linear thinking needs to go. But we're so used to standardizing value in numerical terms that as long as our economic system is founded on ecological principles, that will naturally bring us around to a circular understanding of how value moves around the biosphere. As I make these videos, loads of people send me loads of links back and I log them. All I'm going to do is literally just go through my notes with all the links and kind of show you what I'm seeing and see how it comes together. It might not make much sense, but I'll try and rattle through it really quickly and hopefully you kind of come with me on the journey. So when I thought that maybe trees could do it, I was like, we'll need a lot of trees. Is anyone planting trees? I've moved my web browser from Google to Ecosia, who plant trees when you use their search engine. I guess their ad system powers planting of trees. They have planted over 65 million trees. I saw an article where Ethiopia planted 350 million trees in 12 hours with a population of only 112 million in the country. That's more than 2 trees getting planted per person. So 65 million, 350 million in a day. Well, also, if 7 billion people did that every year, if we planted 14 billion trees a year, 15 years in a row, that would be 210 billion trees. That's 20% of a trillion trees. Ethiopia is definitely increasing my belief that we can do hundreds of millions, if not billions of trees. OneTreePlanted.org, they're putting trees in the ground for $1 a tree as a charity. I don't know how they're affording to do that, but I emailed them and asked them how many they planted. They said they've done 1.75 million, but now at a rate of 4 million a year. So that's not bad. So they will have done 5.7 million by the end of this year, I believe. Greenpop.org, charity that Louis and I used to offset when we were doing Solvi, they're planting at $10 a tree. Woodland Trust in the UK, hopefully other countries have something like a Woodland Trust, they're wanting to plant 64 million in 10 years. Yeah, then I found Tree Day in Australia. If you combine what Ethiopia did and what Australia are doing, that's what we need on a global level. We need a global day where we all go and plant a couple of trees. If we all went and planted 10 trees, we would smash out 1 trillion in 10 years. And their day is Friday the 31st of July and the 2nd of August. I see nothing wrong with that day. We may as well just globalise that day. Obviously I'm not going to rob them, but maybe we should speak Tree Day Australia and see about trying to use your system to go global and include everybody. Why not use what's already there? Dr. Mike Page, who built the QB3 that first got me on to the idea that flying might be bad for us. Researchers estimate 200 billion tons of carbon could be stored by planting new trees, provided we plant over 1 trillion trees. So 200 gigatons makes a significant difference at a global scale. What Mike is concerned about, and I agree it's an important message, we cannot solve the global crisis by just increasing our global budget. but it definitely can help. And the way I see it is for hope and creativity and something to actually believe in, if nothing else, we need actions that we can take to be proactive and leave our mark on the world. I want to be able to look around and show my kids that look at what we planted, look at what we planted for you. And by the time they're my age, there'll be trees like this that are 30, 40, 50 feet high all over the world, and they can see what world we were building. We need that for hope. But if I hook into something like that, then it makes me want to reduce my budget and what I'm spending as well at the same time. David Plummer, my old friend and chairman, very old friend and chairman, he pointed me to a program called trilliontrees.org. It seems like this trillion trees idea has been floating around. 1 trillion trees regrown, saved from loss and better protected around the world. I think this website is basically just setting the scene in the same way that the article is. Never heard of this guy, the Crowther Lab. Thomas Crowther.
Now, with this global perspective, we can layer information on top of each other to find a global answer. And we find consistently across the world, multi-species combinations are always better for capturing carbon and producing wood. That's because different tree species have different strategies for capturing those nutrients and resources in the soil or sunlight. And that means they can be much more effective as a community. The diversity is much more effective.
The diversity is much more effective. And that is my operating philosophical starting point, that we find strength in diversity. And that's what the woods has taught me. But it's nice to hear that someone smart is also saying that you will capture more carbon per hectare if you plant a range of species, because they all have different strategies and tools for nicking carbon out of the air and sticking it into their body. Oh yeah, and then I was reminded that I have actually planted my first tree in Detroit. Not only am I planting the first new tree here, but I'm planting my first ever tree.
You never planted a tree?
I've never planted a tree.
Okay, that's not true.
I've planted lots of vegetables, but planting trees is a longer term investment, mate. And this is the first place I'm doing it.
I've only planted one tree, to be fair.
You want to put a $2 plant at a $10 hole.
That sounds like wisdom right there.
It's not deep enough.
That's a $3 hole for a $2 plant.
I want to make it easier for them.
Yep. That's good.
Perfect.
Good job, Dave.
Yeah,
Anybody else want to fill it in? Let's all do a bit, come on.
Alright.
Wow.
Twinkle a little
Go on,
bit.
boys, don't be shy.
It's nice to get, Rob, get involved.
Yeah.
That's it, keep them loose.
Keep it loosed up.
I'm going to build a tree house in this tree once it's fully grown.
So I like using that as a simple analogy. So 2,800 gigatons is our total budget. And we've got 450 gigatons of carbon equivalent that we can emit. And our pal in the last video, Sam Hatfield, reckons it will cost 12 trillion to remove 150 gigatons of carbon. I reckon we can do it for $10 trillion and save 200 gigatons by planting 1 trillion trees. Obviously, the devil's in the detail, but the point is, I get where he's coming from with those maths, and I can see how we can do it. So then I kind of like got the idea that, okay, 1 trillion trees would probably do it. And it's a nice goal, isn't it? Just a simple 1 trillion trees. There are 3 trillion trees on the planet already, and I'm just suggesting that we need another 1. So 1 new tree for every 3 we've already got. That would equate to 125 trees per person on the planet. New trees. Obviously not everyone can afford to plant 125 trees, so that probably means rich people who are flying a lot and stuff helping fund, let's say, 1,000 trees on behalf of people who can maybe only afford to put 1 in the ground or none. But basically Team Planet, Team Human could probably figure that out. So let's say I planted 100 trees. The question then is getting into more detail about how much carbon is sequestered or captured and over what time period. I became interested, and so I found a paper and then did some pretty geeky analysis, which I won't bore you with, but I'll just show you just to prove it's all there. I took a tree that I know and took a conservative growing average of a Scots pine in kind of slow conditions over 60 years. What is the rate of sequestration? And as you can imagine, as the tree grows, its surface area and demands grow just like humans do. As we get bigger, we want more food. It tails off in later life, but up to 60 years, it's growing each year in its rate of carbon capture, not just the amount it's accumulated. If we get too far into valuing, oh, that tree's captured more than that tree, or if you plant this kind of Japanese knotweed plant, you'll capture more carbon than another one, that would clearly be the wrong signal to send to our market, because above all else you want to plant the right tree in the right place. And I would rather look at an average of carbon capture across the network, but make sure that people are planting the right trees in the right place. Otherwise you could really mess up the whole world. By exporting or bringing in the wrong trees, you can create horrid disease. I want to keep it dead simple. You plant one tree that has a hope of living for 60 years or more. You commit to not burning it afterwards, otherwise all the carbon would go back into the air. And you commit to like looking after it for that period of time. And that creates one token. And you sell that token kind of like a leasehold on the tree itself. Like when we buy a flat, you don't really own the flat. You own the long leasehold for 100 or 500 years to that part of the building. Can you quiet down, mate? I'm trying to explain why it's so expensive to fly in you. I've done some averages. You can see that in the first 9 years of a Scots pine in average conditions, you capture 0.84 kilograms each year. But over the average of the next decade, that goes up to 2.3 kilograms. So that's 2.5 times more carbon capture each year in its second decade than in its first. All the way up to, in its 50 to 60 years, we're talking about 12.2 kilograms a year. 15 times the carbon capture level of the first 10 years average. So basically, the sooner we get trees in the ground, we're going to be having an asset that is just unlocking, compounding carbon interest each and every year. Basically, to sequester your carbon, you'll need 15 times more trees that are in their first decade than if you've got trees in their final decade, which means potentially the value of the token goes up as the tree matures. That's the right signal that we want, because we want people to feel the urgency to plant the trees now, and we're happy for people with more income to do more planting because they feel the pain of burning up the world more than everyone else, as they should. And it may pay off for them later because they may be able to resell the token to somebody else for £10 instead of £5 or £12 instead of 10. For every 15 trees you buy now, in 50 years you would only need one of those to be able to capture and cover your carbon, which means that of the 15 you buy now, you could sell 14 in 50 years and still be capturing your carbon and maybe even make a profit. Plus it means that if you're paying the planter 10 quid or whatever now to put the tree in the ground, that is giving them complete freedom to plant whatever they want, the right tree for the right place, rather than being reliant on government subsidies which are drying up because of Brexit and all that kind of stuff that we won't go into. I drew this little diagram. As you can see, my background is a tree, and you can see those rings on the tree. That really does account for each and every year, and if the ring is wider, that means that that year was a better year for storing carbon than the year before. But that's kind of how this coin will grow in value. Each year the carbon gets stored. If I hold 1,000 tokens for the year, I can say these 1,000 tokens, these 1,000 trees, for this year I am claiming that carbon. And then it is immutably, verifiably captured by Dave Erasmus, the token holder. Now if I then sell those tokens to you, you then hold those trees, and the next year's carbon you can claim for yourself, immutably, irrevocably, because it's all stored on the blockchain. And so people might hold these tokens because they want to invest in a future. They might do it because they want to be part of the Corco community, and this is kind of like how we begin trading and stuff. They might do it because it's a good, potentially, I'm not saying it is, but could be a good investment in the future financially, because those tokens could go up in value as the carbon capture values goes up. Or they might do it just because they're feeling the pain and the guilt of flying too much, like I started this with, and it could go from there. Anyway, I did this analysis. Mike Page tweeted me back and he's like, the key will be to finding one that is planting trees that would not be planted anyway and will lock up the requisite amount of carbon in perpetuity, i.e. for as long as it matters. There's no point valuing trees that are already in the ground or definitely would have been planted anyway, We want to value new trees being planted, and there needs to be that commitment that they're not going to be burnt afterwards, otherwise you're just reversing the good work you've done. And so guess what? The most valuable constructive use of timbers at the end of these trees' lives, when they're ready to come down, is building huts, is construction. It is the most renewable, carbon capturing way for us to build new buildings, is to use timber that we've grown locally and just build huts in the woods and then sell the timber to others to build huts and houses and everything else. And then this is the genius moment where this whole journey of thought, this conceptual idea, started becoming real. I got a message from my old friend Jim, who was actually the biggest client in my first ever business, that when I had 2 or 3 people working with me, he came along. I got on a 3 a.m. train and went up to Newcastle, met him, signed him, and with the amount he was paying me each week, I was able to hire new people and grow the business. We ended up having about 20 staff and then selling the business. And we built technology on top of Google's system to enable us to build a big ad campaign for him really, really quickly. So I've got a good history of a good working relationship with him. He said, I've just raised money to do agroforestry in Scotland. He said, the plan is to buy Scottish estates and plant trees, but clearly more to it than that, so we'll explain. So now Jim, in 4 weeks' time, will have 30 hectares available. So a hectare is 100 meters square, and you can plant, it might be 500, but let's call it 1,000 trees per hectare. 30 hectares is 30,000 trees. And if we were doing it at £10 a tree, that's £300,000. I mean, that's more than enough for an experiment. Even 1 hectare would be enough. But then what's interesting is I just spoke to my friend Roger in Rwanda and asking him whether there's land out there that we could plant trees in. Because in Scotland, they're paying down to £500 an acre. And I'm pretty sure in Rwanda it will be even cheaper than that. So basically, I think for a tree grower to acquire land, buy the tree and plant the tree, and then manage the tree over the committed period of time, I think every tree on this platform will cost between £1 and £10 to put in the ground. Because there's very real world costs involved in this. It's not something you want to set centrally. If Jim says he's willing to put 1,000 trees in his ground and make that commitment and sell those leaseholds for £10 a tree, well then he's setting the market, that's the price. And if someone who's watching this is willing to buy 1 to 1,000 trees for £10 a tree, then the deal is done, that's agreed. Bernard might come along and say, well, I can do 500 trees for £1 a tree. And now you've got an option. Bernard's trees in Kenya for £1, or Jim's trees in Scotland for £10. Or Jim may reduce his price because of competition. And that's essentially how a market begins. Over time, if you analyse that data, you'd be able to figure out an average for what a Corco coin is worth. Probably somewhere between the two, like £5 would be an average, and paying more than that is overpaying, and less than that is cheap. So, I mean, it's exactly like, by doing this, we're going right back to the beginning, where we decided gold was a good standard, but now what I'm saying is, in the light of the world that we live in, the most meaningful, useful currency that we should feel excited to trade with is trees. It's like green gold. Having a tree-backed economy means every time you trade, every time I pay you in a Corco coin, that's me saying, this is the kingdom, this is the world that I want to build. Because think about it, every single time you trade with the Queen's nose on your note, you're reinforcing, we're all doing it, reinforcing the empire. And interestingly now, we don't see that Queen's nose because we just tap with our Visa card. And in a way that's symbolic of the world that we're in as well. We tap with the Visa, the empire of technology, backed by the Queen's nose, backed by nothing. Whereas if we trade, however we do it, with a physical coin, we could do physical coins, or just on the digital blockchain, yes, we're still powered by technology, absolutely, but not corporate technology. It would be community owned. Well, as Storm Ellis said to me, I've seen some people doing some offsetting trading, but he said, but unfortunately it's run by a corporation. The way to corkify it, I've never heard that before, would definitely be a crowd-funded mutual type effort. And mutuals are very interesting structures, age-old structures that I've been led to by a tax expert. And that is absolutely the way I'm trying to structure our state of Corcovado, if you will. And this is kind of the the fund of Corcovado, is in a communally owned, direct democracy, collective type fashion. And to finish off the group of people that are already putting trees in the ground is 10 trees sent to me by my friend Esha. And hopefully I'll chat with their CEO soon. But they have planted 30 million trees, I'm guessing over the last few years, through selling ethical clothing. So go check them out. But even if you just add up those 5 projects, we're talking about a charity, the Woodland Trust. They want to do 60 million. These guys done 30 million. Ethiopia, 350 million. And what's interesting is if all of those groups, charities, Jim's vision to put 300 million into trees, let's call it between 10 projects that could be a billion trees. That's just in a few minutes of research and a few links. If all of those projects decided to verify their trees with our system, they could be getting paid out for that. And we could, most importantly, be collecting one big story. So instead of feeling like it's a government over here and it's a charity over there and a business over there, if we're all on the one platform together, we would all be on Team Tree, basically. We could say that we have planted and are now growing a 500 million or 1 billion trees. It's not hard to get to 1 billion trees. It would take some serious efforts to get to 1 trillion trees. And I think we will say we will never have more than 1 trillion tokens in circulation, because I don't think the world can handle more than 1 trillion trees. So if we promise to never have more than 1 trillion, if you buy a token, you'll know that it's either 1 of 1, 1 of 10, or up to 1 in 1 trillion. That means that we could never hyperinflate or do what they call quantitative easing. It means that we would never disassociate it from the value of the tree, and we would never incentivize the world to plant too many trees. So I think I'm happy with that, 1 trillion tokens maximum. But if we got to that scale, not only would we significantly change the ecological outlook, we would also create one of the most powerful economies based on ecology. Well, the only economy based on ecology, but one of the most powerful economies in the world. That group, transnational, all around the world group, would be a powerful force to be reckoned with. I cannot tell you how much fun I've been having the last couple of weeks talking with friends about this, old and new. My old buddy Simon Kelly, who in that first business helped me grow it, he hasn't really understood what I've been doing for years. It's just not in his frame of reference, really. He's just not interested in it. But we were able to connect and talk about this idea, and he got excited by it. And that, for me, means the world. It means that what I'm working on is kind of reconnecting back to the world that I once knew. And that's been the goal, really, and it feels amazing. And so I really think we might be able to do it. So then I'm like, well, how would you make a dent in the crypto economy world? So what's actually going on with Bitcoin and all of that lot? Well, Bitcoin is $187 billion market. The top 15 cryptocurrencies are all over $1 billion in market cap, which means if you add all of the coins together, the value is currently at over $1 billion. If you go all the way down the list to the 1,000th cryptocurrency, its total value is $650,000. And so if we even got to $1 million worth of trees, 100,000 trees or 200,000 trees, that would automatically make it one of the top 1,000 cryptocurrencies. And I got to say, one of the reasons why I don't think carbon credit systems work very well with individuals is because they seem to be completely ridiculous in how they calculate their maths. If you look at the carbon offset calculators, they sell 1 ton of CO2 equivalent capture for £6. My calculations of the best technology we have in this world, which is planting trees and letting them grow to maturity, is that three trees growing for 60 years captures 1 ton. And we're putting 1 tree in the ground for 5 to 10 quid. So I can see how I can get to 2-3 times the price if I'm willing to blag that I'm accounting for the next 60 years of growth of that tree, and I'm basically selling it 60 years in advance, which is utter bullshit. By natural maths, that's what you would have to do with the technology of trees in order to sell that. And I think you and I will care more about paying more for something that's trusty, reliable, trackable, you can see exactly on a global map where your tree is, than paying less for something that doesn't stack up. If you go into like the crypto world, there are 3 ideas I've seen that are kind of similar. TreeToken.co, they've planted 10 million trees so far, but they're an investment fund, not for individuals. You've got treecoin.io. It's a pretty good model as well. Go have a look at it, but it's not the same. And then carboncoin.cc. None of these do direct-to-tree tracking and carbon capture. We're talking direct, one tree, one token, right tree, right place, carbon capture, year on year, invest now, get rewards later, feel good when you talk to your kids. No one's doing that. So there is actually something that we can do here that won't just work for me, might work for some of you and might work for the wider economy as well. And I just saw a little video this morning from Greta and George Monbiot, which was very exciting.
To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about. But what about a solution that is right in front of us? I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. A tree is an example of a natural climate solution. They take carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions could make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
They are very inspiring, and they're talking about the technology of trees, which is very exciting as well. And they're talking about funding it. And this is the solution. This can do it. I think we can do it. So the next thing is to test it. So Jim has got these 30 hectares. I'm thinking that before we get all bogged down with the blockchain, we do a test. We go from one tree in Detroit to 1,000 trees on a hectare, and then 30,000 trees on 30 hectares. In terms of crowdfunding, if we use Kickstarter or something, and we sold 1,000 trees for like a tenner, so it's like a 10 grand Kickstarter, and you guys can all buy the amount of trees that you want at a tenner a pop. A few percent would go to Corco for handling the transactions, because there'll be costs involved in that. £9.50 or whatever goes to Jim to plant the trees, and he said he can do it literally the next day. These trees can be in the ground by the end of the year, because he's the freeholder of the land and he wants to do it. He just doesn't have the money to go and do it. We will promise, it just might take a while to build the system, but we will promise that you will get one Corco coin for every tree that you invest putting in the ground in Scotland. So basically, I think V1, 1,000 trees, V2 is 30,000 on the blockchain. And then I think once that's done and it works well, then we can start adding different tree producers or growers and scale it, really. That's the idea. 1 trillion trees, save the planet, build a new currency. What do you reckon? Tell me what your thoughts are. I think I've probably been going for about an hour now, so if there's 3 viewers that have made it to the end of this video, give me a thumbs up at the bottom. It would be good to know that some people are still hanging in there with me. This is probably the right idea at the right time, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. So thanks for coming with me on the journey. I'll see you guys very, very soon. Buy your tickets to the Swirl. Listen out for the New Agreements podcast. Go tell your mum you love her, or someone else's mum that you love them. Give someone a hug, plant a tree. Go join the climate activism march. I'll see you very soon. Take care.